A man can hide many things from his wife. He can hide a mistress. He can hide a second phone. He can hide a hotel reservation, a credit card, even a second family. But there is one thing a man can never hide from his wife: his own funeral. This is the story of Richard Prescott, a 47-year-old real estate developer from upstate New York who spent 18 months planning the most audacious betrayal a husband can commit. He didn't just plan to leave his wife. He didn't just plan to take her money. He planned to disappear from her life entirely, to fake his own death, to vanish with $4 million in life insurance, and to start a brand new life with his mistress in a beach villa in the Cayman Islands. He thought he had thought of everything: the boating accident, the fake remains, the corrupt pathologist, the forged passport, the offshore accounts, the new identity, even the funeral itself, the empty casket, the prayers, the tears his wife would cry as she buried a man who was still very much alive. Richard Prescott thought of everything, except one thing. In 21 years of marriage, he never once bothered to ask what his wife's older brother did for a living. Declan Mercer was the fourth-generation owner of the Mercer Funeral Home, the largest in Saratoga County. He had personally handled 3,000 bodies in his career. He could tell, from a single look at a set of dental remains, whether they came from the man they were supposed to represent, or from somewhere else entirely. And when the package containing Richard's remains arrived at his funeral home on a cold Tuesday morning in March, Declan Mercer took one look inside that cardboard box and quietly picked up the phone. He called his sister. He said 4 words. Eleanor. He's not dead. What happened over the next 90 days became one of the most spectacular cases of insurance fraud in upstate New York history. It involved the FBI, 2 countries, a doorbell, a glass of papaya juice, and a quiet older brother who, with nothing but a coffee mug and a funeral home, made sure that his sister's husband stayed buried for the rest of his life. This is the story of how a man tried to bury himself, and the wife who walked up to his porch 88 days later, rang his doorbell and said absolutely nothing. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The phone rang in Eleanor Prescott's kitchen at 6:47 on a Saturday morning in early March. She was standing in her bathrobe, watering the herb garden on the windowsill above her sink. She was making coffee. She was thinking, though she would not admit this to anyone, not even herself, that her husband had been acting strange for the past 6 months. She picked up the phone. "Mrs. Prescott, this is Captain Daniel Holbrook with the United States Coast Guard. I'm calling about a vessel registered to your husband, Richard Prescott. We received a distress signal at 4:30 a.m., 14 nautical miles off the coast of Mystic, Connecticut." The dish towel slipped from Eleanor's hand. She did not see it fall. "Mystic? My husband is in Boston, at a conference. He doesn't own a boat." "Ma'am, the vessel was registered to him on January 14th of this year. We recovered personal items: a wallet, a wedding ring, a driver's license. Mrs. Prescott, water temperature is 38 degrees. Survival time is less than 15 minutes. I'm very sorry. It's no longer a rescue operation." Eleanor sat down. She did not remember moving. "Mrs. Prescott, is there someone we can call for you?" She thought of her parents, both gone. She thought of her 2 grown children, both far away. And then she thought of her older brother. "My brother," she whispered. "Please call my brother." She did not know yet that her brother Declan would arrive at her house 43 minutes later, walk into her kitchen without knocking, put both of his large, weathered hands on her shoulders, and say in his quiet, steady voice, "Eleanor, sit down. I need to tell you something, and I need you to trust me for the next 90 days. She did not know that her brother had been preparing for this exact phone call for 11 months. She did not know that, 290 miles south of her kitchen, on a teakwood deck overlooking the turquoise Caribbean, her husband was sipping a glass of papaya juice, watching the sun rise on what he believed was the best morning of his life. What Eleanor felt, sitting alone in her kitchen at 6:47 a.m., was not grief. What she felt, In the most secret part of her heart was relief. She did not know why. She would understand in 51 minutes exactly why. To understand why Declan Mercer was already 3 steps ahead of his brother-in-law, you have to go back 11 months. You have to go back to a sunny Sunday in April, when Richard, slightly drunk on bourbon at a family dinner, made a single comment that Declan would never forget. Asterisk, "You know what I love about your job, Declan? You're the only guy I know who actually gets paid to make people disappear." Asterisk. Richard had laughed. He had winked. Declan had not laughed. He had driven home that night with the comment echoing in his head. And the next morning he had started a file. He noted that Richard had recently lost 30 pounds. That Richard had switched dentists for the first time in 15 years. That Richard had grown his hair longer. Richard had recently taken out a very generous $4 million life insurance policy that Eleanor was proud of. These details were not suspicious. Not individually. But Declan Mercer had spent 30 years preparing bodies for burial. He knew exactly what features were used to identify remains after death. Weight, hair, dental records. The 3 things Richard Prescott was quietly, methodically changing. By month 4, Declan had taken a former FBI investigator to lunch in Albany. The investigator had listened to him for 5 minutes, set down his fork, and said one sentence Declan never forgot. Asterisk Declan. He's planning to fake his own death. Asterisk. By month 11, Declan had assembled a 400-page file. He had quietly contacted Special Agent Sandra Lynn at the FBI's Insurance Fraud Division. He had given her photographs of Richard at a Cayman Islands real estate office under the false name asterisk Roland Picard. Asterisk he had given her wire transfer records to a Quebec passport forgery operation. He had given her 3 months of surveillance photographs of a 34-year-old former real estate agent named Sloane Vesper, who had also lost weight, changed her hair, and recently bought a one-way ticket to Georgetown. By the morning Richard Prescott died. Declan Mercer was not surprised. He had been expecting it for 11 months. He opened the cardboard box on the stainless steel table in the back room of his funeral home at 7:14 a.m. He looked at the dental remains the Connecticut state pathologist had, astonishingly conveniently identified as belonging to Richard Prescott. He looked at them for a long, long time. Then he walked, slowly and calmly, to his office. He picked up the phone. He called his sister. "Eleanor, he's not dead." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, very quietly, his sister said, asterisk, "I know." Asterisk. Declan paused. "You know? I think I've known for a while, Declan. I just couldn't say it. I'm so glad you said it first." Declan Mercer, who had not cried in 41 years, felt his eyes sting. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry, sweetheart." "Don't be sorry. Just get here." Declan walked into his sister's kitchen at 7:31 a.m. He did not knock. He had not knocked on Eleanor's door in 45 years. Eleanor was sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea. She looked up when he walked in. She did not stand. She did not cry. She simply looked at him. "Tell me what you know." So he told her. He told her about the comment Richard had made 11 months earlier. He told her about the file, the dentist, the weight loss, the investigator in Albany, the FBI, Sloane Vesper, the Cayman Islands real estate office, the forged passport, the $83,000 wire transferred to Quebec. He talked for 46 minutes. Eleanor listened. She did not interrupt. She did not, at any point, look surprised. When he finished, she sat for a long moment without speaking. Then she stood up. She walked to the sink. She poured the cold tea down the drain. And she turned to face her brother. The woman at the sink was not the woman who had been sitting at the table 46 minutes earlier. The woman at the table had been a wife in shock. The woman at the sink was a wife who had just decided she was done. "Declan, what do we do?" He smiled. It was the first real smile he had smiled in 11 months. "Sweetheart, I have a plan. But I need you to do something for me first." "What?" "I need you to grieve." He stepped toward her. He took her hands. "For the next 87 days, Eleanor, You are going to be the most convincing grieving widow that anyone in Saratoga County has ever seen. You are going to plan a funeral. You are going to wear black. You are going to file the insurance claim. You are going to do every single thing a wife would do if her husband had really died on a boat off the coast of Connecticut on a cold Tuesday morning in March. And then on day 88, you and I are going to fly to the Cayman Islands. We are going to walk up to a beach villa. We are going to ring the doorbell. He paused. And when your husband opens that door, when Richard Prescott opens that door and sees the wife he just buried standing on his porch, I am going to step to the side. I am going to let you say whatever you need to say to him. And then I am going to wave to the 7 federal agents standing in the driveway. Eleanor stared at her brother. Declan, you really thought of everything, didn't you? He kissed the top of her head. Sweetheart, I have been preparing bodies for burial for 30 years. I have learned that the only thing more important than what a man tries to take to his grave is what his family makes sure stays buried with him. He stepped back. Now, let's go pick out a casket. We have a funeral to plan. Before we dive in deeper, let us know in the comment section where you are watching us from the time this video gets to you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to us. The funeral for Richard Prescott was held 8 days later at St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Church in downtown Saratoga Springs. 234 people attended. Eleanor wore black. She delivered a eulogy that was, by general consensus, the most graceful speech ever heard at St. Bartholomew's. She did not say he was a good man. She did not say he loved me. She did not lie about anything that could be checked. She simply spoke in the careful, measured way Declan had coached her, with every sentence saying exactly what she needed it to say, and not one syllable more. The hardest part of the 8 days was not lying. It was her children. Her son was 20. Her daughter was 18. They flew home immediately. They cried real tears for a father they thought they had lost. Eleanor wanted to tell them. She and Declan discussed it at her kitchen table 3 nights before the funeral. There is a kind of pain a person cannot unknow, Declan said quietly. If we tell them, they will know forever that their father chose another woman over them. They will not grieve cleanly. It will follow them into every relationship for the rest of their lives. But if we don't tell them, they will grieve their father simply. They will remember him more kindly than he deserved. They will be able to fall in love and trust people without carrying his weight. Eleanor cried that night. Real tears. The first real tears she had cried in 8 days. She did not tell her children. She did not tell them then. She would not tell them for almost 10 years. It was, in her brother's quiet opinion, the bravest thing he ever saw a human being do. At the cemetery, the casket was lowered into the ground beneath an old oak tree. Eleanor threw the first handful of dirt onto the casket. Then she stepped back. She knew, of course, that the hole was almost empty. She knew that her husband was alive, eating fresh papaya on a beach 290 miles south of this cemetery, while his remains went into the ground. And what she felt, standing there with her brother's arm around her shoulders and her children weeping behind her, what she felt, in the deepest part of her heart, was nothing. Not grief, not satisfied, not even relief. She simply felt clean. For the first time in 21 years, Eleanor Prescott felt clean. 290 miles south of Saratoga County, on the morning of his own funeral, Richard Prescott, now legally known as Roland Picard, stood on the teakwood deck of his beach villa watching dolphins play in the surf. He wore a white linen shirt. He held a glass of fresh papaya juice. He was, by every external measure, the happiest he had ever been in his life. Sloane was still asleep inside. She had been sleeping later and later. Back in New York, she had been ambitious, the kind of woman who answered emails at midnight. The woman now in his bedroom slept until 10, drank rose at lunch, and had recently started talking about wanting a dog. Richard pushed the irritation aside. She was adjusting. She would settle in. When the insurance money came through, he was going to buy a $4 million property further down the coast. Sloane would have a project. She would entertain. She would become the Caribbean version of the New York wife she had always pretended to be. He took a long sip of his juice. He thought briefly about Eleanor. He had not, in 18 months of planning, devoted much mental energy to thinking about Eleanor. She was a problem he had solved. He felt, when he thought of her, only a distant sympathy. She had been a kindergarten teacher when he met her. She had wanted to talk about her students, about their children's homework, about the herb garden on the kitchen windowsill. She had been, in short, a small woman with a small life. And Richard Prescott had finally decided, after 21 years, that he was meant for something larger. He felt no guilt. This was, he believed, his great strength. He had watched other men ruin themselves with guilt. He had always known that guilt was a luxury reserved for people who had not yet figured out that you only get one life. He had figured it out. He was living his. 3 weeks later, a private investigator he had paid back in the United States sent him an encrypted message that made him pause. Asterisk strange thing. The funeral home that handled your service is your wife's brother's business. Did you know that? Asterisk. Richard stared at his phone for a long time. He had not known. He had not, in 21 years of marriage, ever really thought about what his brother-in-law did for a living. He knew Declan worked at a funeral home. He knew Declan had been vaguely cold to him. He had never thought about it more than that. For the first time since he had stepped onto the chartered plane to Grand Cayman, Richard Prescott felt, very faintly in the very back of his mind, the smallest possible flicker of unease. It would be, he told himself, fine. Declan was a mortician. He prepared bodies. He did not investigate. He did not have any reason to suspect anything. It was, Richard told himself, a coincidence. He typed back to his investigator. Asterisk forget it. Move on. Asterisk. He did not act on the unease. He let it pass. It was, in the end, the most expensive mistake of his life. On the morning of day 88, Eleanor and Declan Mercer boarded a private jet at the Saratoga Springs Airport at 6:15 a.m. The jet had been arranged by Special Agent Sandra Lynn of the FBI. She had pulled federal strings to make it happen because, as she had told Declan 2 weeks earlier, she wanted Eleanor to arrive in dignity. Asterisk. She is going to walk up to that door, Mr. Mercer. She is going to look that man in the eye. She is going to do it after a private jet and a quiet driver. I want her to walk up to that door looking like a woman he should have been afraid of from the very beginning. Asterisk. They flew south for 3 hours and 41 minutes. Somewhere over the Carolinas, Eleanor turned from the window. Declan, what am I going to say to him? Declan thought about this for a long time before he answered. Sweetheart, you have spent 88 days writing speeches in your head. When you actually see him, when his door actually opens, every single one of those speeches is going to fly out of your head. You will forget all of them. So what do I do? You say nothing, Eleanor. She frowned. Nothing, nothing. You stand on his porch. You look at him. You let the silence say everything that needs to be said. He has heard your voice for 21 years, sweetheart. He has heard you ask him how his day was. He has heard you laugh at his jokes. There is nothing new your voice can tell him. What he has never heard, in 21 years, is your silence. So when that door opens, let him face you. Just stand there. Let him see your eyes. And then turn around and walk back down those steps. Eleanor did not let go of his hand for the rest of the flight. They landed in Grand Cayman at 10:14 a.m. Sandra Lynn was waiting beside an unmarked SUV. 7 federal agents were already positioned around the perimeter of the villa. The villa was a low white stucco building behind a coral-pink bougainvillea hedge. Terracotta porch, 2 clay pots, a dark Cuban mahogany front door, a small brass bell beside it. Eleanor walked up the driveway with Declan beside her. She straightened her navy silk blouse. She smoothed her gray slacks. She tucked a single loose strand of hair behind her ear. She walked up the 3 terracotta steps. She pressed the brass doorbell. The soft melodic chime echoed through the villa. Footsteps approached the door. A lock turned. The heavy mahogany door began to swing inward. And then Richard Prescott opened the door. He was wearing a white linen shirt. His feet were bare. His hair was longer. His beard had grown in. He was holding a glass of papaya juice. He looked at her. For a long, impossible moment, His face did not register what it was seeing. She watched it happen. She watched his pupils widen. She watched the small twitch at the corner of his mouth. She watched the color actually drain from his face, the way she had read about in books but had never quite believed could literally happen. She watched the glass of papaya juice slip from his fingers. She heard it shatter on the terracotta tile. Richard's mouth opened. He could not speak. Eleanor did exactly what her brother had told her to do. She said nothing. She simply stood there, on the porch of her dead husband's beach villa, 290 miles south of the cemetery where she had buried his empty casket, and she looked at him. She let her eyes do what they had never done in 21 years of marriage. She let them be still. She did not soften them. She did not fill them with tears. She did not perform any of the small comforting expressions she had used, automatically, throughout 21 years of being his wife. She simply looked at him, for 13 long seconds, and she would count them later exactly 13 seconds. She let her husband face her for the very first time. He tried 3 separate times to speak. The first time only a small dry sound came out. The second time he managed the syllable L before his throat closed. The third time he whispered the only word he could find. Asterisk how? Asterisk. Eleanor did not answer. She stood for another 2 seconds. She allowed herself one small breath. Then she turned. She walked back down the 3 steps. She walked past her brother, who placed a hand briefly on the small of her back as she passed, and she walked back down the driveway toward the road. She did not look back. She heard, behind her, the sound of 7 federal agents emerging simultaneously from the surrounding vegetation. She heard Sandra Lynn's calm voice. Asterisk Richard Prescott, also known as Roland Picard. You are under arrest for insurance fraud, wire fraud, identity fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. Asterisk. She heard her husband begin, behind her, to make a sound she had never heard him make before. It was not a scream. It was not a cry. It was something else. A deep, broken, wordless sound. The sound of a man who had spent 18 months building the most elaborate lie of his life and who had just understood, in the time it takes for a glass to fall from a hand to a tile floor, that the lie was over. Eleanor walked down the driveway. She got into the back seat of the SUV. Declan got in beside her. She did not cry. She did not speak. She simply reached across the seat. She took her brother's hand. She held it all the way back to the airport. Richard Prescott was extradited to the United States within 72 hours. His attorney took one look at the evidence Sandra Lynn had compiled and told Richard, in their first meeting, that any attempt to fight would only make his sentence worse. The charges were extensive: insurance fraud, wire fraud, identity fraud, conspiracy, bank fraud, tax evasion, 3 counts of falsifying medical records. Sloane Vesper was arrested at the villa 2 hours after Richard. She turned on him during her interrogation, in exchange for a reduced sentence. She wept uncontrollably during her transport back to the States. 6 months later, in a federal courtroom on a Tuesday morning in October, Richard Prescott pled guilty. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. He would be eligible for parole at the age of 78. He would, statistically, very likely die in prison. Eleanor attended the sentencing. She wore the same navy blouse she had worn at the doorbell. Declan sat beside her. Sandra Lynn sat behind them. Richard did not look at Eleanor. He had not looked at her since the moment she had rung his doorbell 173 days earlier. He was 47 years old. He looked, Eleanor noticed in passing, much older. The $4 million life insurance policy was, of course, void. But Eleanor was not poor. 21 years earlier, her father had quietly insisted on a prenuptial agreement that guaranteed her, in the event of documented marital misconduct, the entirety of Richard's commercial real estate holdings. She sold them all. She used the proceeds to fund her 2 children's college educations in full, with money left over. And then she used the rest to start something she had always dreamed of starting: a small private kindergarten on the outskirts of Saratoga Springs, in a converted Victorian house with a large garden. She called it Mercer Hall. She named it for her brother. Declan was, of course, on the board. There is a part of this story almost no one knows. For the first 3 years after Richard Prescott's death, before Eleanor finally told her children the truth, she kept a small, careful tradition. Every Sunday evening, without fail, regardless of weather or season, she set the dinner table for 3, 2-place settings for herself and Declan, who had begun coming over for Sunday dinner every week, and 1 extra place setting, an empty chair, clean plate, a folded napkin, a glass of water. She did not explain it to anyone. Her children, when they visited, assumed it was a small ritual, a way of remembering their father. They did not ask. Eleanor did not offer. Declan understood. The place setting was not for the husband Eleanor had lost. The place setting was for the husband Eleanor had imagined, for 21 years, that she had. The man she had thought Richard was. The man she had thought she had married. The man who, on those Sunday evenings, for 1 quiet hour between the soup course and dessert, she allowed herself to grieve. She grieved him quietly. She did not weep. She did not speak of him. She simply sat at the table, beside her brother, eating slowly, and let the absence of that imagined man fill the empty chair. When dinner was over, she would stand up. She would clear the empty plate. She would wash it carefully. She would put it back in the cupboard. And with that small, simple act, she let that imagined husband go. For 1 more week, until, slowly, over the course of 3 years, the grief grew smaller and smaller. Until one Sunday in early September, 3 years and 4 months after Richard's funeral, Eleanor came down to set the table, and realized with quiet surprise that she had forgotten to set the 3rd place. She stood for a long moment in her kitchen, looking at the 2-place settings. She did not set the 3rd. She poured herself a glass of wine. She turned and looked out the kitchen window at the herb garden on the windowsill. Basil and thyme and rosemary, growing in their small clay pots, in the soft golden light of the late summer evening. She smiled. It was the first true unguarded smile she had smiled in 3 years. 290 miles south, in a federal correctional facility in Central Florida, a man who had once been Richard Prescott was eating his dinner alone in a noisy cafeteria. He had not received a single visitor in 3 years. He thought sometimes about that morning in March, the boat, the papaya juice, the deck of the villa. He thought, more often, about the 13 seconds Eleanor had stood on his porch in silence. He thought most of all about the question he had asked her, the only word he had managed to say, and how she had refused in her quiet way to answer it. How? He had spent every single day of 3 years trying to answer that question for himself. He had never figured it out. The truth, of course, was very simple. He had married a woman with a brother. A quiet brother. Patient brother. A brother who had prepared 3,000 bodies for burial, and who had learned, in that long career, exactly what a body in death can teach you about what a man was doing in life. A brother who had loved his sister, completely and uncomplainingly, from the day she had been born. A brother who had watched her marry the wrong man. And a brother who had decided, 18 months ago at a Sunday afternoon family dinner, that he was going to make sure, quietly, patiently, completely, that the wrong man would never wrong her again. Richard Prescott did not understand this. He never did. He had spent 21 years married to a woman whose family he had never bothered to look at closely. And the man on the other side of the Sunday dinner table, the man with the dry sense of humor and the quiet steady gaze and the small lopsided smile, had been, the entire time, the most dangerous man Richard Prescott had ever met in his life. He had simply, for 21 years, declined to notice. By the time he noticed, it was 88 days too late.